I used to think manipulation was loud, that it came with shouting matches, slammed doors, ultimatums delivered in raised voices. I was wrong. Real manipulation sounds calm, strategic, almost loving. It sounds like your boyfriend's voice drifting from the living room while you're standing outside your own apartment door, keys frozen in your hand, listening to people you trust discuss your life like a long-term investment strategy. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 29 years old. And the moment I realized my relationship wasn't built on love, but on quiet control, was the moment I understood how easily a future can be planned for you without your consent. 4 years. That's how long I'd been with Daniel Harris, my boyfriend. 4 years of shared routines, shared dreams, shared assumptions about where we were heading. I thought we were building something together, slowly, thoughtfully, like two adults choosing each other every day. What I didn't realize was that while I was thinking in terms of us, his family had already drawn a blueprint, and I was the variable they intended to manage. That night, I came home late from work. I wasn't supposed to be there yet. Daniel thought I was still at the office. The lights were on, voices low but confident, and my name, my actual name, slid into the conversation like it belonged there. They weren't arguing. They were planning. Planning my finances, planning my dependence, planning my future commitment, before I'd even agreed to it. I stood there for 10 minutes, listening to the man I loved talk about me like a problem to be solved, like someone who needed guidance, like someone who wouldn't push back because doing so would cost her too much. My relationship, my career, my independence, all woven together into a single thread I hadn't noticed tightening. That night I didn't confront him. I didn't cry. I didn't slam the door. I sat alone in a coffee shop until midnight, staring at my phone, replaying every memory from the last 4 years, wondering which moments were real and which ones were just steps in a plan I was never meant to see. Because once you hear people talk about controlling your future like it's a reasonable business move, you can never unhear it. And everything changes after that. Before I tell you what happened next, you need to understand who I was before I started questioning everything. Because the scariest part of all of this wasn't that Daniel's family had influence. It was how naturally I let their influence feel like love. I'm Emily Carter, 29 years old. I've always been the kind of woman who believes in earning her place. At work, in relationships, in rooms where I feel slightly out of place. I grew up middle class, not struggling, not spoiled, just realistic. My parents were both teachers, the kind who clipped coupons without shame, and taught me that stability isn't something you inherit, it's something you build. I drove an old car because it still ran. I kept my savings separate because that's what responsible adults do. I never assumed anyone would catch me if I fell. Daniel's world was different. Daniel grew up with money, real money, the kind that makes life quieter, the kind that means emergencies are inconvenient, not catastrophic. His family owned a string of successful restaurants across the state, and not just one or two. A whole network. They had a corporate office, logistics teams, staff who managed staff. When I first met him, I didn't know any of that. We met at a coffee shop, one of those places where the chairs are never quite comfortable enough to let you stay too long, but people still do because it feels like being around ambition. I was working part-time behind the counter while finishing my master's degree in engineering. I remember how exhausted I felt that month. Deadlines stacked on deadlines, my mind constantly calculating time the way other people calculate calories. Then Daniel walked in. Not flashy, not loud, just composed. He ordered the same complicated drink every day for 2 weeks. It became a joke with my coworkers. "Your regular is back," they'd whisper. I tried not to notice him at first. I was too busy paying tuition, too busy trying to prove I deserved the future I wanted. But on the 14th day after I handed him that same drink again, I finally asked, half smiling, "Okay, I have to know. Why this drink? Every day?" He looked up from his laptop, smiled like he'd been waiting for me to speak first, and said, "Because it's the only thing that tastes the same no matter what kind of day I'm having." That sentence, it shouldn't have mattered, but it did, because it sounded like someone who had control over his life, someone steady, someone safe. We talked, light at first, then deeper. He told me he was helping his family with business operations while learning the ropes. He didn't brag. He didn't need to. I remember him asking about my degree, my plans. When I told him I wanted to work in engineering, real work, real projects, he didn't look at me like I was cute for dreaming. He listened, like it mattered. Our first date was simple, dinner at a modest place. No show, no pressure. I relaxed around him because he didn't make me feel like I had to perform. And when I found out his family was wealthy later, it hit me like stepping into a different climate. It wasn't just money. It was the way money changes expectations. I was intimidated. I won't pretend I wasn't. Daniel's family lives like the world would always be there for them. Bigger homes, newer cars, vacations planned casually like errands, conversations that included words like expansion, acquisitions, overhead, like daily language. Meanwhile, I was budgeting my groceries based on what week it was. Early on, money caused tension in small ways, little moments that should have been warnings, but I brushed them off because love makes you generous with explanations. Daniel would suggest expensive restaurants without thinking, weekend trips that sounded effortless to him but felt impossible to me. I had to explain quietly that I was living on student loans and a part-time income. He wasn't cruel about it. He just looked confused, like the concept of not having money readily available was a language he didn't speak fluently. But then he adapted. That's what I told myself. He started suggesting cheaper places, cooking at home, movie nights instead of rooftop bars, and he did it in a way that didn't feel like pity. I started believing that meant he understood me, that he respected me. When his family invited me on their annual ski trip to Colorado, I panicked. That kind of trip was a fantasy to me. I tried to decline. Daniel paid for my lift tickets and equipment rental like it was nothing, and when I protested, he said, "I want you there, not your wallet." I remember how warm that felt. How safe. Like love. His parents were welcoming too, at least on the surface. Linda, his mother, was 52 then. Polished, controlled. The kind of woman whose smile doesn't quite reach her eyes until she decides you're worth it. Robert, his father, 55, was the opposite. Charming, confident, the kind of man who could make you feel like you belonged with a single sentence. They praised my education, my ambition. They'd say things like, "Daniel's lucky to have found someone so driven." And every time they said it, I felt myself straighten, like I was being evaluated and passing. Then, after I graduated, Robert offered me a job. Not in the restaurants, he was clear about that. In the corporate office, handling logistics and supply chain management. The salary was better than anything I could have found quickly, especially with limited experience. I was grateful. So grateful it almost made me ignore the knot in my stomach about mixing business and family. Daniel told me it was a sign. "That means they see you as family," he said. And I wanted to believe him. About a year ago, Daniel and I moved in together. We found a nice apartment I could afford to split with my salary. I worried he'd hate it. Older appliances, smaller space. He didn't complain. He insisted we split everything equally, even though I knew he could afford much more. At the time, I thought it was respectful, fair. I told myself it meant he wasn't trying to buy me, that he saw me as an equal. But looking back, there were tiny moments that feel different now. Like when Linda would ask sweetly, "And you're comfortable contributing equally, right?" As if she was checking a box. Or when Robert would talk about alignment and shared goals, as if a relationship was a business partnership that needed optimized planning. Still, I ignored the tension because my life looked stable. A good job, a serious boyfriend, a family that seemed supportive. Until Daniel started bringing up finances in a way that didn't feel romantic. It felt procedural. About 6 months ago, Daniel said we should combine our finances. A joint account, he suggested, just for shared expenses. It'll make everything simpler. My stomach tightened, because to me, combining finances wasn't just practical. It was symbolic. It meant marriage was coming. It meant dependence could happen slowly, quietly, without anyone noticing. I hesitated. I asked for time. Daniel kept bringing it up, every few weeks, in the same calm tone. And then, last month, his approach changed. He started mentioning marriage more, rings and windows, friends' engagement photos, wedding talk that slid into conversations like it was inevitable. And the joint account stopped being simple. It became practice. 2 weeks before the night that changed everything, Daniel suggested a small step. A savings account, he said. Just $200 each a month. Emergency fund, future plans. It sounded reasonable, so I said yes. And I didn't realize that small step was exactly what they were counting on. Because the next thing I knew, I was standing outside my own door, listening to Daniel's voice. Steady, controlled, explaining my financial future like a strategy. And that's when I understood. This wasn't just about money. It was about power. After the night I overheard that conversation, I didn't confront Daniel. Not because I was weak, but because something inside me needed to be absolutely sure I wasn't imagining it. I needed to know whether what I heard was a moment taken out of context, or the beginning of a pattern I'd been too trusting to notice. So I stayed quiet. And once I did, the cracks became impossible to ignore. The first thing that changed was the way Daniel talked about money. Not directly, not obviously. It was subtle. At the grocery store, he'd reach for higher-end items and say, almost casually, "Well, it's easier now that we're pooling resources." If I hesitated, he'd smile and add, "It's for us." The word us used to feel warm. Now it felt like pressure wrapped in velvet. When we talked about the future, his language shifted. He stopped asking what I wanted and started talking about what made sense. Once everything's combined, he'd say, decisions will be smoother. Smoother for who? I started noticing how often he framed my independence as something temporary, like a phase we were gently transitioning out of. Then came the defensiveness. One evening, I mentioned, carefully, that I wanted to make sure we were aligned on long-term financial goals before increasing our joint contributions. Daniel's reaction was immediate. "Why are you suddenly questioning something you already agreed to?" he asked, his tone sharper than I'd ever heard. I tried to explain that I just wanted clarity, that I wasn't saying no, just asking questions. He sighed, rubbed his temples. "You're overthinking this," he said. "It's a simple arrangement." But it didn't feel simple anymore. A few days later, I tried a different approach. I mentioned a coworker who'd rushed into combining finances and ended up in a messy situation. I said it made me want to be cautious. Daniel's jaw tightened. "That has nothing to do with us," he said. "You're looking for problems where none exist." Then came the sentence that stayed with me. "My family's done a lot for you, Emily. I thought there'd be more trust by now." It wasn't a threat, but it felt like one. And once I heard it that way, I started seeing how often that line was quietly reinforced. By him, by his parents, by the environment I was living in. At dinner with his family, money came up the way it always did. Linda would smile and say things like, "Daniel's always been good with planning. He gets that from Robert." Robert would nod and add, "Long-term thinking is what separates stable couples from emotional ones." And Daniel would glance at me, like this was a lesson I was supposed to absorb. When I didn't immediately agree, the room would go slightly colder. Not openly hostile, just disappointed. The biggest shift came at work. Robert invited me to stay late one evening, saying he wanted to check in. He asked how things were going, with the job, with Daniel, with life. I answered carefully. He offered to help us build a comprehensive financial plan, said it was one of his strengths, that he'd help many family members this way. It sounded generous, but something about the timing felt wrong. When I told Daniel about it later, he said, "He just wants to help. You should appreciate that." The word appreciate kept showing up, like gratitude was expected, not for kindness, but for compliance. I started noticing how often my private concerns were becoming public knowledge. I'd mentioned something to Daniel in confidence. Days later, Linda would bring it up casually, like it was a shared topic. "You're still adjusting to financial planning," she'd say lightly. "Totally normal," Robert would add. "Some people just need guidance." Guidance, not conversation, not compromise. Guidance. The final seed, the one that rooted itself deep, was when Daniel suggested increasing our joint savings contribution again. This time to $500 each. "For the house," he said, "for the wedding." I froze. "We haven't talked about getting engaged yet," I said. He smiled, patient, almost rehearsed. "That's exactly why we should be prepared," he replied. "Couples who plan ahead succeed. We can't just drift." I realized then that in his mind the plan already existed. I just hadn't been briefed on it. That night I checked our joint account online. That's when I noticed something I'd missed before. The account was in both our names, but Daniel was listed as the primary holder. He could make changes without me. I couldn't do the same. When I asked him about it, he brushed it off. "It's just a technical thing. We can change it later." "When?" I asked. "After we increase the contributions," he said. "It'll be easier to do all the paperwork at once." That answer didn't sit right with me, because if it was really just a technicality, why delay fixing it? That was when I stopped wondering if I was imagining things. Because patterns don't scream. They repeat. And suddenly, I could see the shape of the trap forming. Slowly, politely, with everyone smiling while it closed. I just didn't know yet how deep I was already inside it. The night everything truly collapsed didn't look dramatic from the outside. No shouting, no slammed doors, no accusations flying through the air. It was quiet, ordinary, and that's what made it devastating. It was a Tuesday. Late. The kind of late where your brain feels like it's made of fog and muscle memory is doing most of the work. I'd stayed at the office finishing a report Robert had asked me to prioritize. Around 9, I realized I'd left my laptop charger at home. Daniel had texted earlier saying he'd be out at his friend Emma's place for their usual weekly dinner. So I didn't bother messaging him. I just drove home, already thinking about grabbing the charger and heading back. When I pulled into the parking lot, I noticed the lights were on. That stopped me. Daniel wasn't supposed to be home. I told myself maybe he'd come back early. Maybe Emma had canceled. I climbed the stairs quietly, keys in my hand, already rehearsing a casual greeting so I wouldn't startle him. That's when I heard my name. Not shouted, not whispered. Spoken clearly, confidently, like it belonged in the conversation. I stopped just outside the door. At first, I thought it was coincidence. Someone else with my name, maybe. But then Daniel said it again, and I realized they were talking about me. Daniel's voice was different than the one he used with me, more precise, more controlled, the way he sounded at work when he was outlining a plan. He was explaining our joint savings account. The emergency fund is just the first step, he said. Once we're married, it'll be easier to formalize everything. I felt my chest tighten. Formalize. I leaned closer to the door, my hand still wrapped around my keys. Daniel continued, "She's cautious, but that's okay. She just needs structure. Once everything's combined, decision-making gets simpler." Then Emma laughed. Not unkindly, knowingly. "That's smart," she said. "Get her comfortable with the arrangement before the wedding. Commitment is easier when it's gradual." Daniel laughed too. Not nervously, comfortably. Emma said something about how her own husband had resisted at first, but came around once she took the lead on finances. "I basically handle everything now," she said. "It's just easier when one person's in charge." Daniel replied, "Exactly. Emily's sweet, but she's not very sophisticated about money." Sweet. Not sophisticated. The words landed like a physical blow. He kept talking. He mentioned how his father had been coaching him, how important it was to align finances early, how dependency could prevent future instability. Then he said the sentence that made my hands start shaking. "She's already dependent on the family business for work. She's not going to make waves." Dependent. Not partner. Not equal. A variable. Emma said, "You're lucky. She's trusting." Daniel agreed. They started discussing timelines, engagement, account consolidation, next steps. Not once did he mention love. Not once did he say my name with affection. I stood there for 10 minutes. 10 minutes listening to my life being mapped out by people who believed I wouldn't push back, because pushing back would cost me too much. I didn't go inside. I didn't confront them. I walked back down the stairs, got into my car, and drove until the streets blurred together. I ended up at a coffee shop that stayed open late. I sat there until almost midnight, staring at the condensation on my glass, replaying every word. Every memory rewound itself under new light. Every compromise, every small step, every moment I'd told myself they meant well. When I finally went home, the apartment was dark. Daniel texted me the next morning. "Fell asleep early. Didn't hear you come in. Hope work wasn't too crazy." I stared at the message for a long time, because now I knew. Nothing had just happened. Everything had been planned. And the worst part wasn't that they'd underestimated me. It was that the man I loved believed I deserved to be managed. The first few days after that night were a blur. It was like my world had shifted imperceptibly, and I couldn't find my footing anymore. The man I loved, the life I had built with him, all seemed like a house of cards teetering on the edge of collapse. But no one saw it. No one felt it except for me. I couldn't talk to anyone, not my friends, not my parents, and certainly not Daniel. What was I supposed to say? "Hey, I overheard you and your best friend discussing me like I'm some kind of investment project, and now I don't know what's real anymore?" No, that wouldn't do. It would sound crazy. I would sound paranoid, untrusting, irrational. Instead, I did what I've always done when I feel out of control. I retreated into myself. I told myself I was overreacting, that maybe I was reading too much into things, that it was just a misunderstanding. After all, I had overheard their conversation by accident. Maybe it wasn't as calculated as I was imagining. But the thing about secrets is, once you hear them, you can never unhear them. The next few days were a war inside my head. I'd wake up, make coffee, and act like everything was fine. I'd smile at Daniel, we'd share breakfast in silence. He'd ask how work was, and I'd answer, my voice steady, my eyes anything but. He didn't know. Not yet. He thought I was still the same Emily, the one who had spent months agreeing to everything, the one who didn't question or push. But I wasn't that person anymore. Every time he touched my hand, I felt cold. Every time he said "we" in that confident tone, it sounded like a well-rehearsed script. Every time he mentioned his family's helpful advice, my heart would skip in my chest. He didn't see it. He didn't understand that the trust between us had fractured into pieces I couldn't put back together. By Thursday, I couldn't hold it in anymore. The questions were louder than my self-doubt. The dissonance between the life I thought we had and the life Daniel's family had planned for me was deafening. So I confronted him. We were in the kitchen, just like every other evening. He was getting dinner ready, chopping vegetables with his usual focus. I stood at the counter, watching the knife move through the onions, my pulse drumming in my ears. "I need to talk to you about something," I said, my voice shaking despite myself. Daniel didn't look up, didn't pause his chopping. "What's up, babe?" "It's about the money," I began, trying to make it sound casual. "I've been thinking about the joint account and the savings plan we talked about." His hands froze for a second, and I saw the flash of a defensive smile tug at his lips. "We've already agreed on it, Emily. You know the numbers work." "No," I said, cutting him off. "It's not just about the numbers." He turned to face me then, his expression changing slightly. Not concern, more like curiosity, the kind you reserve for when someone says something they don't quite understand. I felt a wave of anger rise in my chest, but I kept it controlled. I wasn't going to explode, not yet. "You've been talking to me about finances and our future, but I overheard something the other night," I said, my voice quieter now, thick with the words I had to force out. "You and Emma. You were talking about me like I was part of the plan, like I was just a step to be managed, a variable to control." I watched as his face shifted. The lightness of the moment drained away, replaced by something I couldn't quite place. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice low, careful. I took a breath. "I heard you, Daniel. I heard you talking about me, about how you wanted to guide me into your financial plan, how you thought I'd be okay with everything, because I'm already dependent on your family's business. It felt like everything was decided without me, without us." He looked taken aback. "Emily, that's not—" "No," I cut in. "That's exactly what you said. I wasn't imagining it. I heard it with my own ears." There was a long silence, his jaw clenched, his eyes flickering between me and the countertop, like he wasn't sure whether to apologize or defend himself. "I never meant for you to feel that way," he said finally. "I just thought, we're planning our future together. My family's been through a lot with their businesses, and I just wanted to make sure we had everything in place." "Everything?" I echoed. "Or your idea of everything?" His expression faltered. "You think I'm doing this because of them? I'm not trying to control you. I'm trying to help us build something. Don't you see that?" "I do see it," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "But I don't want to be built into someone else's plan. I want to make choices together. I want us to make decisions, not just follow whatever your family thinks is best." His face softened, for the first time since I'd started talking. The defensive wall was crumbling. "Emily, I didn't mean for it to come out that way. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought if we were both on the same page with finances, it would make everything easier for us." "Easier," I repeated. "Why is everything about easier? This isn't easy for me, Daniel. This is about trust. It's about us, not your family, not your finances, not a savings account. Us." I didn't wait for him to respond. I turned, walked to the bedroom, and shut the door behind me. I didn't cry, but my chest ached like I'd just buried everything I thought we were, and I wasn't sure how we were supposed to move forward anymore. The days that followed our confrontation were silent. Not in the dramatic, angry way, but in a way that felt like we were both walking on eggshells, trying to make sense of the cracks in our foundation without disturbing them any more than necessary. The kind of silence where every word feels too heavy, too important. Daniel tried to approach me several times, but every time he did, something held me back. I wasn't ready to listen, not until I could understand the full scope of what was happening, not until I knew if I could trust him again. And in the meantime, the world around me seemed to grow louder. His mother, Linda, had always been a presence in our lives, but after that night, she seemed to intensify in her subtle way. Every conversation about finances seemed to circle back to her. Whenever Daniel and I talked about our future, it felt like her voice was right there, hovering behind him, in the back of his mind. One evening, a week after our argument, we were sitting in the living room when Daniel's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and immediately tensed up. "Who was that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's my mom," he said, his voice uncharacteristically strained. "She just wants to check in on us. She's been worried." Worried. I could feel my stomach twist into a tight knot. Linda had always had her opinions, but this felt different. It wasn't just concern, it was control. I watched Daniel pick up the phone and walk into the next room, leaving me alone with my thoughts, and with the sudden realization that nothing had truly been resolved. It wasn't just that Linda's presence lingered, it was that Daniel was listening. And not just to me, but to her. The next day, I heard the confirmation of my fears. I was on a call with my boss when I noticed Daniel pacing around the house. He wasn't on his phone, he wasn't watching TV. He was fidgeting, as though something was eating away at him. I finished my call and walked into the living room, where he was sitting, his face pale. "Are you okay?" I asked. He looked up, startled, as if he hadn't realized I was there. "I'm fine," he said, his tone low. "It's just, I don't know how to handle everything. My mom's been sending me articles about relationships and finances, and it's starting to get to me. I feel like I'm stuck between you and her." My heart sank. "You're stuck between me and her?" I repeated, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. "I didn't mean it like that," he said quickly. "It's just, she has a lot of experience, and she's been trying to help me see things more clearly. I'm just—" "No," I interrupted, my voice rising. "No, Daniel. This isn't about experience. This is about her control, and you're letting it happen. Every time you talk to her, you're letting her influence us." He looked guilty, but his defensiveness was still there. He opened his mouth to argue, but I held up my hand, stopping him. "Don't," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and hurt. "You've been talking to her behind my back. You've been taking her advice on our life without considering what I want. You don't get to hide behind her anymore." He opened his mouth to say something, but stopped himself. For the first time in days, there was a long silence. It wasn't a comfortable silence. It was a silence that made me realize how deep the problem ran. It wasn't just about financial control anymore. It was about trust, or the lack of it. That night, I received a message from Seth, Daniel's younger brother. "Hey, Em, I need to talk to you. Can you meet me tomorrow? Just us." I stared at the message for a long time, trying to decide if it was a good idea. I didn't want to involve anyone else. But Seth had always been the one person who felt like a neutral ground in this family. The next day, we met at a cafe. Seth looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat as though he wasn't sure how to start. "I don't know how to say this," he said quietly, "but you need to know that you're not the only one who's been feeling this pressure." I raised an eyebrow, surprised. "What do you mean?" He leaned forward, looking around to make sure no one was listening. "It's not just you, Emily. I've been talking to Daniel, and I can tell he's being influenced by Mom. She's been telling him things about you. She's been telling him you're a gold digger." My breath caught in my throat. "Excuse me," I whispered, stunned. "What are you talking about?" "She's been planting seeds, Emily. She's been telling Daniel things about your intentions, about how you're just using him for his money. She's trying to make him question you." I felt my stomach drop. "I don't understand," I said, my voice shaking. "Why would she say that? Why would she want him to think that about me?" Seth sighed. "Because she's always been like that. She's been controlling Daniel his whole life, Emily. She doesn't want him to make any decision that doesn't align with her vision. She's always kept him close, and now that you're in the picture, it's like you're the threat." I leaned back, stunned. Everything I'd feared had been true. Linda's influence on Daniel wasn't just subtle, it was deliberate. She had worked her way into our relationship, manipulating the way he viewed me. And Daniel, without realizing it, had let her. That night, Daniel came home late, his face drawn. I didn't wait for him to sit down. "I know," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I know everything." He froze, eyes wide. "What are you talking about?" "I talked to Seth," I said. "He told me everything. About Mom, about the way she's been controlling you, and us." Daniel opened his mouth, but no words came out. "You need to make a choice, Daniel," I said, standing up. "I'm not going to fight for your love anymore if it means fighting for her approval too. I can't keep doing this." The next few days were a blur. I felt trapped, suffocated by everything that had been building up without my realizing it. The weight of the situation felt unbearable. And the worst part? I didn't know how much of Daniel's love was really his, and how much of it was simply an extension of his family's control. The days after our confrontation were quieter than I expected. Not peaceful, but quiet, like the stillness before a storm. Every conversation felt forced, and every look Daniel gave me seemed like he was searching for something. An answer, an apology, a way to make everything go back to normal. But I couldn't just move on. I couldn't act like nothing had happened, because the truth was that everything had shifted in me. I couldn't look at Daniel the same way anymore. I couldn't look at our life the same way anymore. I had been holding on to this illusion of us, of teamwork and mutual respect, and now I was seeing how fragile it really was. The worst part? I wasn't sure if Daniel even saw it. The last few days felt like I was in a fog. Every time I tried to talk to him, to explain what I was feeling, it felt like we were speaking different languages. We were stuck in this uncomfortable space, this waiting game, where we both knew something had to change, but neither of us knew how to make that change happen. I could feel him pulling away, but it wasn't because he didn't care. It was because he was torn. Torn between me and his family. Torn between wanting to protect our relationship and still being influenced by his mother's manipulative control. I tried to act like everything was fine. I tried to smile at dinner, pretend that the silence between us wasn't eating me alive. I told myself to be patient, that we just needed more time, that maybe we could find a way to fix things if we both tried hard enough. But the more I tried to convince myself, the more I realized how suffocating it all was. And then there was the silence. It wasn't the kind of silence that was peaceful. It was the kind that made you feel isolated, like you were living in the same house as someone, but a million miles away. The first time he didn't come home at his usual time, I told myself it was nothing, that he was just working late, that he'd gotten caught up with something at the office. But when he didn't respond to my texts, when he didn't call to let me know where he was, the old doubts crept back. What was I supposed to think? It felt like he was avoiding me. When he finally came home that night, hours later, I was already in bed. I didn't want to look at him, didn't want to feel that nagging emptiness inside me grow even more. I kept my back turned, facing the wall, pretending to sleep. He stood by the door for a while, just staring at me. I could hear his soft breath, like he was trying to gather the courage to say something. But he didn't. And in that moment, I realized that I was no longer the person I once was, the person who would have waited patiently for him to come around. I wasn't going to beg for his attention anymore. I wasn't going to beg for his love. I had spent months trying to fit into a life that wasn't really mine. I had spent months trying to make it work when I wasn't the one making the decisions. And now, I was tired. Tired of feeling like I was losing myself. Tired of feeling like my future was slipping through my fingers every time I looked at him. I had spent so long wondering if things would get better, wondering if the love we shared could overcome everything that was weighing us down. But in the end, it wasn't just about love. It was about respect, it was about trust, and it was about choice. I couldn't keep choosing him if he was still choosing her. I couldn't keep living in this limbo, pretending like I could fix everything on my own when he wasn't even acknowledging that something was broken. The next morning, I woke up early. It was still dark outside, the kind of early where the world feels like it hasn't quite woken up yet. I slipped out of bed, careful not to disturb him. I stood in the kitchen, my hands resting on the counter, looking out the window. I didn't know what to do anymore. I didn't know if we could ever get back to the place we were before. I didn't know if I wanted to. I had been trying to save us, but I couldn't save a relationship that didn't feel like it was mine anymore. By the time Daniel woke up, I was already packing my things. The words I had been avoiding, the words I had been terrified to speak, finally left my mouth when he walked into the living room. "I'm leaving, Daniel," I said quietly. "I can't do this anymore." His face fell. He opened his mouth like he was going to protest, but no words came out. "I love you," I said, the weight of it heavy on my chest. "But I can't stay in this. I can't keep waiting for things to change when I'm not the one making decisions." "I don't want you to leave," he said, his voice cracking. "Emily, please don't go." "I don't have a choice," I whispered. "You've already made it for me." I left that day, not in anger, not in a rage, but in a quiet, aching resignation. I didn't know where I was going yet, but I knew I had to leave. I couldn't stay with someone who was still choosing his mother's approval over his own wife. I couldn't keep waiting for him to see me as an equal when he was still being manipulated by her every step of the way. That night, I stayed at a friend's house. I didn't call Daniel. I didn't answer his texts. I didn't want to talk. I just wanted to breathe. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. The next day, Daniel called again. He apologized. He said he was wrong. He said he understood now that he didn't want to lose me. But something inside me knew it was too late. The damage had already been done. The trust that had been broken couldn't be fixed in one conversation. The fear of losing myself in this relationship was bigger than any promise he could make. And so I let it go. That was the moment I knew I was done. The days after I left Daniel were some of the hardest I've ever faced. The weight of it all, the shock of leaving, the guilt, the constant replaying of every moment in our relationship almost crushed me. I could hear his voice in my head, asking me to come back. I could see the sadness in his eyes when I left, but deep down, I knew I couldn't go back. Not until I found something I had lost along the way. Myself. I had given so much of myself to the idea of us, to the idea of making this relationship work. I had poured my energy into it, sacrificed pieces of myself in the name of love. But when it came down to it, I realized that love, real love, doesn't mean losing your identity. It doesn't mean letting someone else make decisions for you, or letting someone else's fear of change dictate your future. That's when I realized the most powerful thing I could do wasn't going back, wasn't trying to fix what was broken. The most powerful thing I could do was move forward, no matter how hard it was. So I did. I threw myself into my work. I spent hours at my desk, focusing on what I had control over, my career, my life. I needed to reclaim my independence. I needed to remind myself that I had a future outside of Daniel and his family. And most importantly, I needed to trust myself again. During this time, I got a call from Rachel, my former colleague. She had been a huge help when I first left the pharmaceutical sales job, and now she had an even bigger opportunity for me. "Emily, I need you," she said over the phone. "I've been thinking about you for a while now. You've got the skills, and this consulting firm is growing faster than I expected. We need someone like you." I didn't hesitate. I said yes. Rachel offered me a position as a senior consultant with her firm. The base salary was good, and the commission structure was even better. It was a fully remote position, something I could handle from home without the constant travel that had made me so sick in the first place. It was everything I needed: freedom, security, and a chance to prove to myself that I could thrive without anyone else controlling my path. The offer was a turning point. It wasn't just a job. It was a sign that I was on the right track, that I was moving towards something better, something that had nothing to do with Daniel or his family. But even as I embraced this new opportunity, there was still a lingering part of me that couldn't forget the emotional toll of the last few months. I hadn't fully processed the depth of my pain, the hurt of realizing that the man I loved had been so influenced by his family, that he had so easily let go of our partnership in favor of their control. And yet I knew I had to keep moving forward for myself. The real turning point came when I finally faced the truth about the relationship I had with Daniel and with his family. It wasn't just about the money, the joint account, or the manipulation. It was about the way they had treated me. The way I had been made to feel like an outsider in my own relationship, like I was never enough because I wasn't following their carefully designed plan. Daniel had been raised in a world where everything was mapped out for him. His career, his finances, his future, it was all decided by his family, and he didn't know any other way. But I wasn't raised that way. I wasn't raised to follow a script. I wasn't raised to be managed. And that's when I realized the greatest power I had wasn't in confronting Daniel again or trying to make him see things my way. It was in realizing that I had the strength to let go. I had the strength to walk away and build something entirely new, something that was entirely mine. That afternoon, I went to the bank to close the joint account. I didn't even need to ask for help from Daniel. I simply walked in, signed the paperwork, and took the balance from the account that had once symbolized our partnership. It wasn't about the money. It was about taking back control. It was about making the final break from everything that had tried to keep me small, to keep me in a place where my worth was determined by someone else's opinion. I didn't feel guilty. I felt relieved, free. When I left the bank, I didn't feel the usual weight of decisions pressing down on me. I felt lighter than I had in months. And that's when I knew I was finally free. The following week, I went to see Diana, my older sister, for some much-needed perspective. She had been the one person who never doubted my strength, who always knew that I was capable of standing on my own 2 feet. I needed her advice, her grounding, because I knew I wasn't entirely through the storm yet. We sat in her living room, sipping tea as I told her everything: how I left Daniel, how I felt about his family's manipulation, and how I was starting to rebuild my life. She listened intently, nodding as I spoke. "I knew this would happen, Em," she said softly. "You're stronger than you think. You've always been. And it's time for you to see it too." That night I cried, not out of sadness, but out of sheer release. I had been holding on to this weight for so long, and now I was letting it go. I realized that for the first time in a long time, I was doing exactly what I needed to do for me. I wasn't trying to fix things with Daniel. I wasn't trying to appease his family. I was just living. And it felt good. When I came back from Diana's house, I got another message from Daniel. I hadn't responded to any of his texts or calls in days, but this one felt different. It wasn't filled with apologies. It wasn't full of manipulation. It was honest. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he wrote, "but I'm sorry for everything. I never should have let them control what we had. I hope you find happiness. I'll always care about you." I read the message once, then twice, and for the first time since I left, I didn't feel a thing. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I just felt done. And that's when I realized that I didn't need him to change to move on. I just needed to let go and start living the life I deserved. That was my turning point. I was free to build my future on my own terms, without the weight of someone else's expectations holding me down. And I wasn't going to look back. The fallout from leaving Daniel wasn't immediate. It didn't happen all at once. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash, where each second drags on longer than the last, and every shift in the situation feels like it's pulling me deeper into the wreckage of everything I had left behind. I was living in a new apartment now, one I could afford on my own. It was smaller than the place Daniel and I had shared, but it felt like a sanctuary, a place where I could breathe, a place where I didn't have to worry about his family's expectations or whether my every move was being judged or planned for me. But even though I was physically out, I wasn't emotionally free just yet. Daniel didn't give up easily. For the first few weeks after I left, he sent texts, long ones, short ones, apologetic ones, angry ones. At first, I read them. I wanted to understand what was going through his head, even if it didn't change anything for me. But then it became clear. His apologies were empty. He wasn't sorry for what he had done. He was sorry that he had lost me. I stopped replying. And then it got worse. One afternoon, I received a call from Seth. His voice was quiet, almost hesitant. "Hey, Emily," he said. "It's Seth." I wasn't sure what to expect. Part of me had been avoiding Daniel's family as much as I could. They were part of the reason I left in the first place. "I need to talk to you about something," he continued. "It's about Daniel." "What about him?" I asked, already feeling a knot form in my stomach. "He's been different since you left. Not in a good way," Seth said. "I don't think he fully understands what's happening to him. He's been blaming himself, but he's also been blaming you." "Blaming me?" I asked, confused. "For what?" Seth sighed. "For breaking everything. He's been going on about how you ruined the relationship by leaving, how you left him no choice but to listen to his mother's advice. He doesn't see it. He's still in this mindset where he isn't the problem." I felt a pit in my stomach. "Seth, I don't want to hear this," I said, my voice tight. "This isn't something I can fix anymore." "I know," Seth said, his voice soft. "But I think you need to know that it's not just your relationship with him that's falling apart. It's everything. He's losing his family too." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "Dad's filing for divorce," Seth said quietly. "Mom doesn't know yet, but he can't live with her control anymore either. He heard her talking about the escape fund, and it broke him. He's leaving her." The news hit me like a punch to the gut. I had suspected something was off between Robert and Linda, but hearing it out loud felt like a slap in the face. "They're all tangled up in this web," Seth continued, "and Daniel's caught in the middle. It's tearing him apart. He doesn't know who to trust. He's still holding on to her vision of everything, and it's making him self-destruct." I sat in silence, my heart pounding in my chest. Part of me wanted to reach out to him. I wanted to tell him it wasn't too late to change, to realize that he could make his own decisions without his mother's influence. But then the other part of me, the part that was done sacrificing for someone who couldn't see me for me, shut it down. "I can't fix him, Seth," I said softly. "I can't be the person he needs me to be anymore. I'm just done. And I need to stay done." "I know," Seth said. "I'm just telling you because, well, I don't want you to think you're the only one hurt by all this. It's not just you and Daniel. It's everything." A few days later, I heard from Daniel himself. I hadn't expected it. I had been avoiding him as much as I could for my own peace of mind. But when his name popped up on my phone, I felt my stomach twist. I couldn't ignore it. Not now. He called twice before I finally picked up. "Emily," he said, his voice raw, "I need to see you, please." I was silent for a moment, trying to decide whether I should say yes. But the pain I felt was still too fresh, the walls I'd built around my heart still too thick. "I don't know what you want from me, Daniel," I said quietly. "I've told you everything I could. I left because I couldn't stay in this. I couldn't stay in a place where I was made to feel like I wasn't enough. And you're still doing it, still letting them control everything." "I know," he said, his voice cracked. "I know, and I'm sorry. I've lost everything. I've been trying to figure out who I am without her telling me what to do. But I don't know how to do it without you. I can't do it alone." I heard his words, but they didn't hit me the way they should have. I should have felt something. Sympathy, maybe. Or even a tinge of regret for everything we had. But all I felt was exhaustion. "You had a choice, Daniel," I said, my voice steadier now. "You always had a choice. And you chose her over us. Over me." "I didn't mean to," he whispered. "I never meant to hurt you, but now it feels like I've lost everything." "You have lost everything," I said, my voice firm. "And it's not just because of what your mother did. It's because you let her control your life. You let her decide who I was, who we were. And I can't keep fighting for a relationship when it's always been a fight I didn't even start." There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. I could hear him breathing, but he didn't say anything for a while. "I'm sorry," he said again, the words barely a whisper. I don't know how to fix it." "You can't fix it, Daniel," I said. "You need to figure out who you are without all this control. But I can't wait for you to do that. I've already waited long enough." The days that followed were a blur. Daniel sent messages, but I didn't respond. It was the first time in weeks that I felt the weight of the situation begin to lift. I realized I was already living without him. I had already moved on in my heart, even before I'd walked out. But his family's fallout continued to swirl around us. Linda was trying to salvage her marriage, but the cracks were too deep. Robert filed for divorce, and Seth distanced himself from everyone, torn between his loyalty to his brother and his disgust with their mother's control. The more I watched from the outside, the more I realized how much I had been caught in the same toxic web, the web that had been designed to trap me into a version of love that wasn't mine. And now it was time to truly move on. That was the end of us. And somehow it felt like the beginning of my life. It's been 5 weeks since everything fell apart. I still think about Daniel sometimes, how he looked at me that last time we spoke, his eyes filled with a mix of guilt, regret, and desperation. I don't know if he'll ever understand why I had to leave, or if he'll ever fully grasp how deeply his family's control hurt me. But that's not my burden anymore. I've had time to reflect, time to heal, and time to build something new. I can't say I'm over it, not completely. The scars are still there, buried deep. The emotional exhaustion lingers like a faint hum in the background of my life. But I've learned something crucial in these weeks of silence, in these weeks of rebuilding. I've learned that love is not supposed to be about control. It's not about feeling like you're walking on eggshells, like every choice you make has to be approved by someone else. It's not about fitting into a box or living out someone else's vision for you. Love should make you feel free. It should make you feel seen, heard, and supported, not manipulated, not managed. And the hardest lesson of all? I was the one who let myself be manipulated. I was the one who ignored the signs, who let someone else's vision for me take precedence over my own. But in the end, I learned that love has to start with me. I have to love myself enough to stand up for what I deserve, without apology. So here I am, sitting at my desk in my new apartment, my life feeling more mine than it ever has. I've found peace in the quiet that once terrified me, and I'm realizing that this space, this solitude, isn't a sign of defeat. It's a sign of growth. I took a leap of faith when I left Daniel. It wasn't easy. There were days when I questioned whether I made the right decision. But now I know it was the right decision because I was choosing myself. There are still days when I think about the life I could have had with him, the vacations, the dinners, the partnership we could have built. But the truth is, I would never have been truly happy. Not if it meant living a life that wasn't authentically mine. The hardest part? Realizing how easily I had been led down a path I didn't want to follow. The easiest part? Choosing to walk away, even when I didn't know what would come next. And I think that's the lesson I'm meant to carry forward. I am the one who gets to decide my future. Not anyone else, not Daniel, not his family, just me. As for Daniel and his family, they're still tangled in their mess. Robert is finalizing his divorce from Linda, and Seth has pulled back even further from the family. I heard from a mutual friend that Linda is still trying to fix everything, to convince Daniel that she was right all along. But Daniel is quiet now. He hasn't reached out to me in weeks. I don't know if he's trying to change, trying to figure out where he went wrong, or if he's just stuck in his old patterns. But that's not my concern anymore. I can only control what I do, not what anyone else does. And right now I'm focused on me, on my career, on the life I'm building for myself. The truth is, I don't know what my future holds. I don't know if I'll meet someone new, or if I'll continue to grow alone. But that's okay. The uncertainty doesn't scare me anymore, because I know I can stand on my own 2 feet. I've done it before. I'm stronger now, more whole. And as I look at the future, I realize that it doesn't matter who I was in the past, or what I left behind. What matters is the person I am becoming. And that person, she's unstoppable.